While Allied troops wade through blood-stained surf in Normandy, the Führer sleeps behind closed doors, having stayed up past 3 a.m. the night before discussing art, architecture, and his plans for rebuilding German cities after the war. Hitler's daily routine had become increasingly nocturnal. He rarely rose before noon, often staying up until dawn with his inner circle, subjecting them to hours of rambling monologues about his grand visions for a 1,000-year Reich. But on this morning, the most critical morning of the entire war, his staff faced a dilemma that would have seemed absurd if the stakes weren't so catastrophically high. Nobody dared wake him up. Let's understand why. By 1944, Hitler had surrounded himself with a culture of absolute terror. General Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff, later testified that officers lived in constant fear of the Führer's explosive rages. One wrong word, one piece of bad news delivered at the wrong moment, could result in dismissal, disgrace, or worse. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, Hitler's chief military advisor, mockingly called La Keitel by other officers, meaning lackey, was so terrified of his master that he had become little more than a yes-man, nodding agreement to even Hitler's most delusional orders. The first reports of the invasion reached German High Command at around 3 a.m. Berlin time. Paratroopers had been spotted. Naval activity was detected off the Norman coast. Something was happening. But was this the real invasion or another feint? For months, the Allies had conducted Operation Fortitude, an elaborate deception campaign to convince Hitler that the main invasion would come at Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. They created phantom armies, used double agents, and even deployed inflatable tanks and fake radio traffic to sell the illusion. And it had worked brilliantly. When Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, received the first invasion reports, he believed Normandy was a diversion. The real attack, he thought, would still come at Calais. And crucially, he couldn't mobilize the Panzer tank divisions without Hitler's personal authorization. Those Panzer divisions, particularly the 12th SS Panzer Division and the Panzer Lehr Division, were positioned inland, within striking distance of Normandy. If deployed immediately, they might have reached the beaches while the Allies were still vulnerable, still establishing their foothold. But Field Marshal von Rundstedt couldn't give that order. Only Hitler could. And Hitler was asleep. As morning turned to late morning, the situation grew desperate. General Erich Marx, commanding the 84th Corps directly facing the invasion beaches, was frantically calling for reinforcements. His undermanned divisions were being overwhelmed. At the Berghof, Hitler's adjutants whispered nervously outside his bedroom door. They knew the Führer had given strict orders never to be disturbed before he woke naturally. They knew his temper. They had seen men broken for lesser infractions. Major General Rudolf Schmundt, Hitler's chief Wehrmacht adjutant, conferred quietly with others. Should they wake him? Would he blame them for bringing bad news? What if this really was just a feint, and they disturbed him for nothing? The clock ticked forward. 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m. Allied soldiers were pushing inland. German defenders were fighting and dying, without reinforcements. The panzers sat idle, their engines cold. Finally, sometime around 10 a.m., accounts vary slightly, Hitler awoke on his own. When Hitler was finally briefed on the invasion, multiple witnesses recorded his initial reaction. According to several accounts, including those of his valet, Heinz Linger, and Luftwaffe adjutant Nikolaus von Below, Hitler remained remarkably calm at first. He reportedly said, "So, they've come." Not panic, not rage, just a simple acknowledgement. But then something peculiar happened. Hitler smiled. According to some accounts, he seemed almost pleased. Why? Because he still believed this was what he'd been waiting for. He thought the Allies had finally committed themselves to a major landing, where he could destroy them. Erwin Rommel, the famed Desert Fox, who commanded Army Group B in northern France, had repeatedly told Hitler that Germany's best chance was to defeat the invasion on the beaches themselves, within the first 24 hours. "We must stop them in the water," Rommel had said, "not only delaying them, but destroying all enemy equipment while still afloat." Hitler agreed with this assessment. He believed that once the Allies were committed to a beach landing, his Panzers could trap them against the sea and annihilate them. It would be, in his mind, their Dunkirk in reverse. But there was still the question. Was this Normandy landing the real invasion? Or was it a diversion before the main attack at Calais? Hitler's next words would prove catastrophic. When his commanders requested permission to release the Panzer reserves, Hitler hesitated. According to Jodel's later testimony, Hitler said he wanted to wait and see how the situation developed. He wanted more information. He still suspected Calais might be the real target. "We cannot commit our reserves based on incomplete intelligence," he reportedly stated. This hesitation, this need for certainty in a moment that demanded decisive action, meant the Panzers remained stationary for crucial hours. Some historians argue they weren't released until mid-afternoon, roughly 12 hours after the invasion began. General Leo Geyer von Schweppenberg, commander of Panzer Group West, was furious. His tanks could have been at the beaches by mid-morning. By afternoon, Allied air superiority made movement in daylight suicidal. But Hitler had another concern that day, one that seems almost trivial given the circumstances, yet reveals much about his state of mind by 1944. He had a scheduled meeting with Hungarian Prime Minister Domher Stoye at Klesheim Castle near Salzburg. Despite the invasion, Hitler insisted on keeping this diplomatic appointment. He would discuss the Normandy landings, but he wouldn't rush back to his military headquarters or cancel his schedule. At his afternoon military conference, Hitler finally addressed his assembled commanders about the invasion in detail. Several officers who were present recorded his statements. Hitler declared that the Allied invasion was good news. He insisted that now the enemy had finally committed themselves, Germany could destroy them in a decisive battle. He mentioned his V-weapon program and suggested these would undermine Allied morale. But his statements also revealed something darker, a deepening detachment from reality. Hitler talked about the invasion as if German forces were far stronger than they actually were. He dismissed concerns about Allied air superiority. He seemed to believe that will and determination alone could overcome material disadvantages. General Gunther Blumentritt, von Rundstedt's chief of staff, later recalled Hitler's words. "The enemy must be thrown back into the sea. Every man will fight and die where he stands." Inspiring rhetoric, perhaps, but meaningless to the commanders who knew they lacked the forces, the fuel, and the air cover to achieve such objectives. One commander, whose name varies in different accounts, dared to suggest that Germany's position was precarious. Hitler reportedly snapped back, asking if the officer was defeatist, if he lacked faith in German victory. The room fell silent. No one else questioned the Führer's assessment. As evening fell on June 6th, the full scope of the Allied landing became undeniable. 5 beaches, thousands of vessels, overwhelming force. Yet Hitler's public statements, relayed through propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, remained defiant. The invasion would be crushed. Germany would prevail. The Atlantic Wall had been breached, but the enemy would be driven back. But in private, some witnesses noted cracks in Hitler's confidence. His hands shook, a tremor that had been worsening for months, possibly due to Parkinson's disease, or the numerous drugs his personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell, injected him with daily. Albert Speer, Hitler's architect and armaments minister, visited the Berghof that evening. He later wrote that Hitler seemed more unsettled than he had ever seen him. Though Hitler continued to insist the invasion could be repelled, Speer detected an underlying anxiety. That night, Hitler retired late again, having talked for hours about the need to defeat the invasion quickly, before the Allies could establish a secure foothold. But the truth was already clear to anyone willing to see it. By the end of D-Day, over 156,000 Allied troops had landed in France. Despite fierce resistance and thousands of casualties, they had established 5 beachheads. They were bringing ashore tanks, artillery, and supplies. The moment for a decisive German counterattack had passed. The panzers that could have made a difference in the morning were now forced to move under Allied air attack, taking heavy losses before even reaching the front. So what did Hitler say when he heard D-Day had begun? So, they've come. 3 simple words. Not a battle cry, not a strategic insight, just an acknowledgement. But it wasn't what Hitler said that mattered most. It was what he didn't do. He didn't wake early. He didn't immediately rush to his military command center. He didn't release the Panzer reserves the moment he was informed. He didn't cancel his diplomatic appointments. He didn't, in those critical first hours, treat June 6th with the urgency it demanded. Some historians have argued that even if Hitler had released the panzers immediately, the outcome might not have changed. Allied air superiority was overwhelming. Allied naval gunfire could devastate German armor approaching the coast. The invasion force was simply too large, too well planned, too determined. But we'll never know for certain, because Hitler's delay guaranteed the panzers would arrive too late to matter. Field Marshal Rommel, who was actually in Germany visiting his wife for her birthday on June 6th, having been told by meteorologists that weather conditions made an invasion unlikely, later stated bitterly, "If only I had been there. If only the panzers had been released." After the war, General Blumentritt wrote, "The first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive. For the Allies, as well as Germany, it will be the longest day." He was right, and Hitler spent much of that longest day asleep, then hesitating, then attending to diplomatic niceties, then issuing orders to troops who could not possibly achieve what he demanded. But perhaps we're asking the wrong question. Perhaps the question isn't what Hitler said on June 6th, but rather what June 6th revealed about Hitler. By 1944, the Führer, who had once shocked Europe with his audacity and military intuition, had become something else. Isolated in mountain retreats, surrounded by sycophants, dismissing any dissenting voices, Hitler had lost touch with the reality of Germany's position. He believed in wonder weapons that existed only on drawing boards. He moved phantom divisions on maps that had long since been destroyed. He raged at generals who told him the truth and promoted those who told him what he wanted to hear. The man who woke up late on D-Day was not the man who had gambled on the Rhineland remilitarization, or seized Austria, or bet everything on the quick defeat of France in 1940. This Hitler was diminished, sick, increasingly paranoid. Just weeks before D-Day, he had survived an assassination attempt by German officers who saw no other way to end the war. His response would be savage. Thousands arrested, hundreds executed, including some of Germany's finest officers. The Hitler of June 6, 1944, was a man who could still inspire fear, but no longer inspire victory. In the days following D-Day, Hitler continued to insist that the invasion would be repelled. He ordered reinforcements to Normandy that couldn't get there. He refused to allow tactical withdrawals that might have saved German formations. He insisted on impossible counterattacks. Within weeks, the Allies had broken out of Normandy. Paris would be liberated by August. By September, Allied forces would be on Germany's border. The war would continue for another 11 months. Hundreds of thousands more would die. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. It had been decided on D-Day. The day Hitler woke up too late. Years later, when historians examined the German response to D-Day, they found something revealing in the official military records. The authorization for Panzer reserves to move toward Normandy was finally given at 14:30 hours, 2:30 p.m. By then, the sun was already beginning its descent toward the horizon. By then, the longest day was more than half over. And by then, the war, though Germany would fight desperately for almost another year, was lost. Hitler's words on D-Day were few and unremarkable. But his silence, his delay, his detachment from reality spoke volumes. Sometimes, what we don't say, what we don't do in the crucial moment, reveals more than any words could convey.